Welcome everyone, and welcome to our May webinar for an update on safety news. So I'm Gary Rowe, CEO of Safety Action. I'm joined with Andrea Rowe, our General Manager this morning. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Gary, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for the webinar.
Thank you. So today we've got a fairly busy and packed agenda, maybe I may say often as usual. So what we'd like to spend just a few minutes on to explain the background to sometimes new news that's come up since our newsletter, but also to give you a bit of background to some of the things we've briefly covered in our monthly safety newsletter. So psychosocial climate surveys, machinery safety innovations, which I'll hand over to Andrea back when we come to that, with some, I think, very interesting findings come out of a conference Andrea attended in Rome. Quad bike accidents continue to happen for those in the, particularly in the farming industry. Andrea's got some interesting information from the Northern Territory about their interest in white cards, which are the construction induction cards, often referred to as white cards these days. In the past, they were called blue cards, red cards. They've seen green cards. I think they've had all different colours, Andrea, I think, over the years.
Yeah, that's right. And now it's Australia-wide called the white card. But keep in mind the red, the blue, all the others are still valid.
Yeah, correct. Good point. And another electric gate accident. We appear to have serious accidents with big, heavy electric gates. Are fine when they work. So we'll come back to that. So that's what we'd like to look at. As usual, I've got a couple of questions of the week for you. So question one, safety shoes are a regulation requirement where mobile plant operate or where heavy items are handled by workers. So is this true or false? Okay, fairly simple. We see lots of this in any business that has particularly forklift trucks, other mobile plant, and handling heavy items in a factory setting or warehouse in particular, mandate safety boots. So there's your question. Safety shoes are a regulation requirement if you have those circumstances, true or false? Question two, we've come into some fairly nippy cold mornings in Melbourne for those in the Melbourne and Southern Victoria area. And what temperature are offices required to maintain for staff in the colder winter months? So is it acceptable for an office not to have heating, for example? So there we go. We'll come back to this. I've got three questions today. So third question, workplace safety laws require vehicles that are used for work must comply with the manufacturer's instructions, which is often in the user manual, the motor vehicle manual, often in the glove box of the car, which if you look at it, will probably tell you things like you need to check the oil and tyre pressures at least weekly. So I often see that in manufacturers' instructions. So are businesses that have staff operating and using vehicles for work, is it workplace safety laws require that we follow those manufacturers' instructions, and therefore are we required to do weekly checks of tyre pressures, oil and water, etc. So there we go. So let's kick off with our main topics for the day. We'll come back to those three questions at the end of this session. And so psychological health and safety at work. And before we cover the surveys that I've put into the newsletter for just ideas that you could implement fairly quickly and easily, just a bit of background, if you like. So what's the state of play? So let's be clear. The definition of health has long included psychological health. In every state of workplace health and safety legislation around Australia, where they talk about health and safety, in the definitions of the legislation, it has always included psychological health. So it's always been there as in the act that you should consider this and obviously control it. But what we've lacked is, until recently, regulations that tell employers specifically what they needed to do for the psychological health of workers. So what did that mean in the workplace? How far did you have to go and what did you have to do? So for other than Victoria, so virtually every other state and territory in Australia, where they operate under the model Work Health and Safety, WHS laws. They've got the Psychological Risks Amendment Regulations, which have been inserted in Reg 55, Parts A to D, and they're relatively simple. And I'll show you that in a moment. So Victoria's had draft amendment psychological health regulations out for a number of years now, but we understand that they've announced that they will actually implement these regulations or amended by the end of this year. So we'll expect Victoria will come on board with regulations, but we're not sure if they're going to mirror and start to look more like the WHS regs in the other state territories, or whether they'll stick to their highly prescriptive regulations on psychological health. So we'll let you know as soon as they're released. So the other state of play, if you like, let's have a look. There's an Australian standard, which is also issued as an ISO international standard on OHS management, psychological health and safety at work. So it's a 2021 edition. A number of the states have put out codes of practice, as you can see summarised here. And Safe Work Australia, often seen as SWA, have got 2 codes: managing psychosocial hazards at work from 2022 and work-related psychological health and safety, systematic approach to meeting those duties back to 2019. So we've had guidance on psychological health in work for over 5 years now, as you can see there from these codes. So there's if you like, the state of play, and the regulations under the WHS are very general. Essentially, they just tell you the meaning of a psychosocial hazard means a hazard arising out of those things, which are basically how work is organised, and that you're to control those risks. And all they say is essentially part 3.1 is to use the normal risk assessment method. So we identify hazards of those things and we put in appropriate controls. So they've not overly prescribed how businesses are to manage psychosocial risks, rather that's included as part of their risk management approach, that's one of the items that we look at, that we identify hazards and concerns of staff and how that may come about, and we're going to put in appropriate controls. So that's how they've chosen to do it. And as I've mentioned earlier, Victoria's earlier draft regulations on this subject were highly prescriptive, requiring a number of specific things, including 6 monthly reports to WorkSafe. So we'll look with interest to what the Victorian regs look like when they come out. So just looking at our newsletter topic, I thought, what could I help businesses do right now? Because we're not clear where Victoria is going to go with their psychological health regulations, which we'll find out shortly. So we hope by the end of this year. So one thing I thought of is I'll call it a level 1 psychological health climate survey. And maybe, do you have any concerns at work about bullying, sexual harassment, aggression or violence, exposure to traumatic content or events, or job demands, which could be the design of the job, the environment, the equipment you've got to work with, interactions and behaviours of your teammates, etc. And if so, please explain. This would be a very low-key, easy, if you like, climate survey, preliminary, to just say, at a high level, do our staff indicate they've got any serious matters? And if so, what are they and where and how are they coming about? And so not prescriptive into little boxes and that you would then do some statistical analysis, but just to understand in plain words from your staff for those who want to answer those questions. That was my thought. Very high level, but I think might be a very good starting point. And I came across online with a far more detailed psychological mental health test. And I think it is more of your traditional mental health, maybe something psychologists use. I don't know what psychologists use, but let's just suggest that these 20 questions a bit more detailed, and it simply says, I feel overwhelmed by my emotions, question one. And it's got, do you strongly agree, mildly agree, neutral, mildly disagree, and strongly disagree? And you do that for all 20 questions. And there's a scoring system, as you can see there, and you can put there less than 40 score out of those. You're struggling somewhat. Maybe you're coping well with the stresses, or you're flourishing. So somehow you're not strained by any of these sort of issues posed in these 20 questions. I don't think too many businesses would use this more sophisticated test, Andrea. I think it'd only be the very mature businesses, wouldn't you think, to get to, and it's somewhat personal as well.
Yes, look, and I think, this that psychological, mental health test, this one it could help to identify where workers are struggling, but not necessarily on the work-related factors that you can manage and control. Something else our co-worker was reminding me about when you conduct these tests is that it's believed that if you you're asking these surveys and questions about psychosocial health, you need to back this up by offering the support for the workers, because they could find it invalidating to tell you, we have all these problems in the workplace. So you actually need to follow that up and offer them to support, and of course follow through on getting down and identifying where the problems are and fixing them.
I like that, Andrew. It's a very good point. So the first one, that level 1 survey, is very much work related. So it asks about your concerns at work. And these 5 categories are the ones listed in the psychological health draft regulations in Victoria. They're the 5 categories of psychological health. So number 1, I think you're right, Andrew, this would be more directed to at work, and therefore presumably more directed at what companies could do to respond to that as well, because they have control over work environment, but not things outside of work.
Yeah, so I think this first level, I think it's really critical to help companies to identify where are your potential problem areas so that you know where to start.
Yeah. I don't know if you can recall from the newsletter, Andrea, I thought there was one interesting answer that came out of this psychological mental health thing. Obviously, somebody had filled it out and how they scored themselves. And it said, you are harder on yourself than you are on others. Why not extend the same kindness and understanding to yourself? And I think some people beat themselves up, sort of very tough. And I thought, what a lovely thing to help somebody to maybe lower their blood pressure and just think a little bit different about what they're doing. So, so good point, Andrew, and thank you for that. And so, Andrew, turning to our second topic, the machinery safety conference you attended in Rome, I think last month or the one before, you're going to tell us a little bit more about. So the first part is the key research claims that that you've got here.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Andrea, your speaker's gone off, Andrea.
Thanks, Gary.
That's it. You're back on. You're back on, Andrea. I can hear you now.
Great. So it was a fantastic conference that I attended back in March in Rome. Yep. And as always, you do learn a lot at these conferences, and this one especially because it was very research focused, and in particular on innovations in the machinery safety field, presented by researchers and representatives from organizations and companies that are really involved and have a very data driven and a lot of research gone into this. So it was very interesting to see. And one of the research claimed that using of artificial intelligence could prevent half of all machinery related accidents, which is fantastic. And given that there is a lot of fear associated with the use of AI, it's important as safety professionals for us to just understand the benefits as well, so that we can weigh these things up together.
So Andrea, when I read that, I thought that was a bit of a fantastic claim, And I think, am I right? So I was thinking, how would artificial intelligence stop me putting my hand in a machine? And I think it
Yeah.
was a reminder, have you done the checks or are all the guards in place? Is that the sort of things artificial
Yeah, that's
intelligence?
right. So it was the examples that I've heard, a lot of it still requires a human intervention or change of behavior. So, for example, there's these things are already in use in businesses where the camera, so the surveillance camera, but it's actually reading and interpreting information. So
Okay.
it
Yeah.
can detect, for example, a person's proximity. Is a person getting too close to a vehicle, for example.
Okay.
And then there can be built-in alarms, which then warns the person
Yes.
that they're, too close to, a man or a machine. But that would still require the person to stop or,
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
supervisor, if they were using this information, they would still need to
Yeah.
intervene here. But what we know is that using a machine, so artificial intelligence, is a lot quicker and can be more accurate when used as this type of surveillance. And it can also be used to capture data so that you know where the problems are, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I was also interested, Andrew, in that exoskeleton wearable thing, and I think there was
yeah.
an image of somebody can lift heavier boxes, but without putting the strain on their back. Is
Yeah,
that
and
what they
I've
meant by
actually
that?
seen some of these exoskeletons are in use here in Australia. We've seen them in meat processing factories,
Mm.
and so some of them are very high tech. And these exoskeletons, some of them can collect data,
Yeah.
as well as preventing the body from moving in a way that it shouldn't. So what we know is if you use force, if you lift something heavy while your back is twisted,
Yeah.
that is the position where you're likely to cause a back injury. So some of these exoskeletons can actually prevent that movement.
Yeah. Okay.
Only allowing you to do that lifting and bending in the correct straight back position.
Thanks,
Uh,
Andrew. And
so
Diane
really
just,
great
yeah. Yeah.
technology there.
Okay, I'll
Um,
come to the others in a moment, Andrea. And Diane just said, back to our previous topic, that psychological first aid was very helpful as well. So thanks for that. And a few other comments are coming up. Hopefully people can read them. If not, we'll hopefully come back to them. So Andrea, the other one I liked, so bear with me, was the hackers caution, and
uh,
particularly the other survey findings I found very
yeah.
scary. Can
Um,
you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there was a lot of concern expressed by the group at the conference about the potential, cyber security or cyber safety
Mm.
risks, which is essentially if equipment, so for example, cobots, robots, auto-guided vehicles, if these devices and mobile cranes, this type of thing, if they're connected to an internet or have a remote controller, potentially they can be hacked. So if they don't have the correct cybersecurity measures, somebody either inside the workplace, sometimes it could be they need to be within the vicinity. Sometimes these devices could be hacked even from overseas.
Mm.
Now, the danger of this is that it's believed half of these equipment that could be hacked could be dangerous to human safety if they were
Okay. Yeah.
overtaken by the hacker.
Hmm.
What we expect is most cases where a hacker would hack into your equipment, it's not with the intention to deliberately harm people, but the threat exists. The intention would be to cause business disruption by taking control of your equipment. And if this happens, in most cases, emergency stop controls and other types of controls at the equipment become inoperable. So,
Oh.
because the hacker now has control of your equipment. So, the important thing is that if you have this type of equipment, if the vulnerability exists, you need to have a way built in to actually isolate the equipment and take control back of your equipment.
Thanks, Andrea. And this other survey part here on screen was even more scary for me, Andrea.
Yes,
The
so a German organization conducted extensive surveys, and what they found, so 20% of machinery had safeguards defeated. So the respondents answered that from time to time,
Yeah.
20% of the machinery might defeat safeguards. But what we said is even more concerning is the respondents said that 10% of machinery in their business was permanently defeated. So had, for example, an interlocked door, which has been defeated, which we've seen, we've seen it around the world, Gary, where operators might have an extra prong that they can put into an interlock, which tricks the machine to think that the safety door is closed, and it allows the machine to operate with the door open, which can be very dangerous. Even more concerning than that is that supervisors knew or tolerated at least half of that machinery defeating. So in some cases, that might have been encouraged.
I find that so scary, Andrea, that across our businesses around Australia, our supervisors know this equipment is faulty, the safeguards are faulty or disabled, and tolerate it. And they're the ones that have prime responsibility to find that hazard and act on it for the management, because senior management don't know what's happening out of there on the shop floor.
Correct. And so I strongly advise everyone that if your business has machinery, you need to look closer. Then, when you walk past a machine, it will not be visually obvious to you unless you look further. So you need your safety managers to actually audit your equipment or do regular inspections where they're actually checking for this, because you need to uncover this before a person does suffer an injury.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And the disabled interlock fine increase, which was probably appropriate, I think, from what I've read here. Do you want to tell us a bit about this?
So in this case, a company was fined, but then the prosecution actually appealed and requested the fine be increased, and it subsequently was increased. What it was found is that the equipment had been the interlock had been bypassed, and there was a warning notice put at the machine. But a worker came to fix a blockage or damage in the machine, and the worker believed that the machine was correctly interlocked, so they believed that they were accessing a safe machine. Yeah. What they didn't know is that an interlock had been bypassed, and they suffered a serious crash. I believe it was a head injury. They found the interlock had been overridden with tape over the sensor, and of course, after the incident, nobody admitted to actually doing this, so they don't know how long this machine had actually been in this situation for. So this is just a real life Victorian local example of that these defeating interlocks can actually injure people and have financial consequences for the company as well.
Yeah, it actually confirms what you were told at that international conference, Andrew. Here's a classic example of it, of what they're saying is happening. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we know it is, it's still happening, and your supervisors may know about it as well. So, suggest auditing your own business to find out.
Thanks, Andrea. And just to mention to everyone, in case you've either in the farming or industry, or you have friends or know someone, quad bikes, whether for recreation or for work, they're particularly hazardous when they tip over and they crush people. So a New South Wales vineyard operator was fined $200,000. It was a labour hire worker, and what they presented to the courts, as I understand it primarily, is that they failed to confirm the skill experience of that labour hire worker using quad bikes, who then used it inappropriately, and it tipped over and caused crush injuries to that worker. So the labour hire company was separately prosecuted and fined, but this is the prosecution for the host employer. And what they allege is that they failed to check, was this person adequately trained? And if not, to train them yourself before you set them the task out in the farm. And so, Andrew, I think something about white cards, because you do quite a bit of principal contractor PC audits from time to time and other construction reviews. Tell us about this.
And so what the Northern Territory WorkSafe has warned against, which could certainly apply to other states, is that they've come across workers. So as you might know, when you do the white card, the construction induction training, you do that all around Australia with a registered training organisation. And if you do it with a registered training organisation, they then send your certificate or evidence that you've done the course to the state regulator, in this case, the Northern Territory WorkSafe, and then WorkSafe sends you your construction induction card. But what has happened is they've found some people applying to them for the construction induction card, but they've declined to issue a white card to the worker because they have done an online course which was advertised as being a correct online construction induction training, but it actually was not.
So it was not an approved supplier of that training.
Correct. So WorkSafe NT does not have any approved online courses. So if you see a course advertised for the NT as an approved white card course and it's online, it is not an approved course. So don't do that one. So if you do need to send your workers to construction induction training, just verify. You can actually check on the regulator websites. Especially for WorkSafe NT, check that supplier is on the list and do make sure your workers do the course with that recognised supplier so that they will in fact receive that white card at the end of the training.
And just to clarify, Andrea, every state in the legislation has listed they will accept white cards from other states. So if it's already approved and you've got one, so here on the image on the right is a Western Australia card.
Yeah, which you may have in fact done that course online, like I did many years ago.
Andrew, that is my white card. That is my white card there. Done a number of years ago.
So it is valid, and it is valid for construction work in the Northern Territory as well, as long as it is in fact the white card issued by the regulator. And I did mention earlier the older, if you have a valid red card or other construction induction card that was issued prior to 2008, that remains to be valid, still is valid as well.
Correct. And yet another electric gate accident, Andrea.
Yeah, and I was just saying to you, Gary, when we see these, sometimes you put it in the newsletter, and I think another one, didn't we mention this one just recently? Yeah. And it's very sad. And I said to you, I think in Australia, we're hearing at least annual fatalities involving electric gates coming off their tracks. And, you know, these gates can weigh several ton up to, 2 or 3 ton, the big electric gates. And so when they do come off the tracks and fall onto the worker, we've seen many fatalities and otherwise serious injuries have occurred as well.
Yeah. In fact, in this case, they were servicing the gate and the technician took away a part. I presume that part was probably the motor and something to do with the stops on the gate. So when a worker 2 days later was manually pulling it shut, the gate came past the stoppers and fell over on top of him. It was a fatal accident. So this happens, as you said, Andrea, I think 1 or 2 fatalities a year, but I would think many lesser injuries and maybe still permanent injuries are happening, less than fatalities. So there's quite a few of these happening around Australia.
Yeah, so my message is if you have electric gates, these powered security gates, inspect your gate and have a look at the design, whether this gate can actually come off its tracks. Some of them can sort of jump, in different weather conditions, or if the track gets damaged, they can come off the gate. And if they're not correctly secured to the track, at the back of the gate, they can come off, or sometimes the gate can travel too far. Some of them don't have a really good stopper at the end, and that stopper is what's preventing the gate from going off the track. So if the stopper is just like bolted on to the end and it's only, sort of the size of a door stopper, that's not enough really to prevent a 2-ton gate from rolling off if it comes at the stopper with some force. So check out the design of the gate if it's and see that it cannot come off the tracks. And then also consider that if the gate is hit or damaged, it might not look like it could come off the tracks, but potentially still could in an accident. So your business needs to have a response plan. to actually, what do you do if the gate fails? So you need to get the gate in a safe position immediately. Gary, I remember, I think last year there was a case where a business was fined after another fatality where there was an accident and the manager had done something but didn't make the gate safe. So he called for a repair to the gate, but in between when they called for the repair and there was an accident where a worker tried to manually operate the gate and it fell on them. So if your gates are damaged, you need to actually chain them up or do something so that the gate cannot be moved in between, while you wait for a repair of the gate.
I think, Andrea, we spoke, Andrea, you can't put security of the site above safety. And if that means chaining the gate in the open position and locked safely so it can't fall, you may have to just temporarily put a safe security guard on location or whatever other precaution you need to do, but you cannot put security of this property of the site ahead of physical safety of people saying, the gate's faulty, but I have to secure the site. So no, I'd open the gate, rope it, strap it, chain it in the safe position until it's made serviceable. So maybe enough on that one.
And it's, it's worth noting that most of these gates should never be manually operated by one person alone either, because they are in fact very heavy.
Yeah, good point, Andrea. Thanks for that. And just a final reminder, we're coming up to a last chance to book for our 2-day safety leadership course coming up. Some of the things we've spoken about would actually be dealt with more effectively if your key supervisors and frontline managers had attended a course like this. So all we say to people listening to this now, think about you and your business and the people you're dealing with. Would they behave better, be more mindful, be better equipped with information if they were good safety leaders? So there you go, give that one some consideration. And given our time's pretty well up, let's just have a look at the questions of the week. And I know, Andrew, these are not aimed at you. So, but we see PPE, safety footwear, in many, many businesses, and this is quite appropriate. But what I can tell you, it's good practice, but there is no specific regulation prescribing safety shoes in those circumstances. So the regulations only refer at a high level to personal protective equipment, PPE, but it is not prescribed what that PPE is. So, for example, a company may choose to say, we're not having safety shoes. We stop the forklift truck when people walk into the warehouse, for example. So we stop all mobile plant. Well, you don't. And if you're not handling heavy items that could fall on your feet, then you don't need safety footwear necessarily. So it's left to a company rule. There'll also be Australian standards, which will talk about PPE as well, will give you guidance. Another one, particularly topical, I think, here in Melbourne at the moment, with some of the cold weather and very cold temperatures early in the mornings, the temperature to be kept in an office in the winter months. And you'll see a trends happening with these 3 questions today. It's not prescribed by regulations either. So you can't say you're in breach of the law. You are not maintaining 21 degrees in my office. That's not prescribed. But there's numerous ergonomic codes and guidelines. And we've got a fact sheet, which if anyone wants it or hasn't already got it, they can just call or ask us at any time. At Safety Action, we'll send it to you. Broadly speaking, best practice ergonomic guidance is between 20 and 26 degrees is comfortable for most people. However, people will not experience ill health effects between 18 degrees and 30. So even that will be quite tolerable with certain precautions. But you also got to consider humidity. Typically, it's comfortable between 40 and 60%. So you may not realise the air conditioning plant in most of your offices is actually taking humidity out of the air when it's very humid days. So that's what the air conditioner does, as well as lowering the temperature. It's controlling the humidity. So as you know, you go up to northern Queensland, very humid days, it's very oppressive. It might only be 32 degrees, but it feels like for us down here in Melbourne, like it's 42 degrees. and also air movement. So people often ignore this and only want to talk about temperature. So now you know you've got to talk about humidity, you've got to talk about temperature and airflow. So less than 0.2 meters per second air movement is generally comfortable. So often people can be in a comfortable office, but they're in a drafty area, or they're too close to the air vent, which is putting out nice air, but you're too close to it. So the speed of the movement of the air is in fact the problem now. So just recommend people wear appropriate clothing, possibly with layers, to cope with slight movements up and down of temperature and possibly air movement within the office. And there's your guidance, and you can ask for the fact sheet.
Hey, Gary, I just wanted to share as well about the mental health. In fact, workers that are working in uncomfortable conditions are actually more likely to have a mental injury at work, which makes sense. If you think it's, if your workplace is uncomfortable, and if you're cold, and if you don't have, if it's cold when you're eating, it's cold when you're working, I can imagine that might make you feel a bit miserable if that's where you are every day.
Yeah, there you go. If I'm uncomfortable, I'm niggly and I'm not going to listen to you. Yes, that's right.
So it can actually increase the impacts of if your workplace has other mental health issues. An uncomfortable environment can actually contribute and increase that too.
Thanks, Andrea. And the final question this week was, work vehicles must check oil and tyre pressures weekly per the manufacturer's instruction. So this is for work vehicles. And as I said, there's a bit of a pattern with all three of these. All three questions today, there are no specific regulations prescribing what we just said. However, employers for due diligence are expected to follow manufacturers' instructions for machinery, plant and equipment, including vehicles that they have, and they would need a good reason why they didn't. So, but it could be that the business looks at this and says, given our nature of our work, the infrequent use, the minor usage, we feel weekly checks are not necessary. Plus, we have warning lights for water and oil on the dash, which are functioning. And many cars now also have warning lights for low tyre pressure. So that might reduce that. And that would still show due diligence. So it's good practice to follow manufacturers' instructions, but not the law.
And I think, where you have higher risk equipment, certainly, with the forklift, we know the operators do that every day in their pre-start checks. And it may well be the case, for, operating heavy vehicles as well, that you do that pre-start check when the vehicle is more higher risk.
Yeah, thank you. And a number of people have got some chat there.
Now, I did just want to briefly, we don't have time to answer Carol in detail, but she did ask about the workers' personal type of issues, so sleep issues, trauma. Your workers may, have depression, and it's a mental health medical issue outside of work. So it's important to understand when we look at the psychosocial health regulations, the obligation is on a workplace not to cause harm to a worker's mental health through, the design or work-related issues. So we cannot harm a worker's mental health at work, but we still have an obligation to the safety of our workers if, given their health. So when we talk about health and fitness to work, a worker's personal, medical, or mental health condition could actually present them to be unsafe at work. So somebody, there's certain mental health conditions that someone might come and they're not actually in a fit state to operate a vehicle, and if they're not sleeping at home, they might not be fit to operate machinery. So you still have that obligation, no matter why the worker is not fit for work. You have an obligation to actually not allow a worker to have themselves in an unsafe physical environment as well. So you do need to certainly keep them safe. And of course, it's responsible to actually refer your worker to treatment and make sure they're getting the support that they need to get healthy.
Thanks, Andrea, and Linda's just said thank you for that as well. So we're a little bit over time, but hopefully we've provided something of interest and of value to everyone this morning. So thank you very much for that, and thank you, Andrea, for your time once again and contribution today. Particularly interesting that machinery safety points the fact that the supervisors actually know about most of the machine guarding deficiencies, but they tolerated it. That is not good safety leadership. So thanks once again, Andrea. Thanks everyone for attending, and bye.
Thanks everyone. See you next time.
Bye.